welcome back to another episode of the Open Source Cafe. I think this is the 70th one, which is, a really, really special one indeed. A good, very, very great person in the community, Rawkode, also known as David, or David, also known as Rawkode, whichever way you prefer. But yeah, I'm really excited for this one. And David has needs no introduction in the cloud native community, but he has years and years of experience, has inspired me a lot, and he has a great YouTube channel as well, and he's doing an amazing conference, Cube Hurdle. So all the links I'll leave in the description below. But before we get started, David, would you like to tell our viewers a little bit more about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. So, I go by David or Rawkode. I'm not fussed. Feel free to use whatever you're more comfortable with. I am a staff developer advocate at a infrastructure as code company called Pulumi, and also a live streamer and YouTuber on the Rawkode Academy, where I focused on making cloud native hopefully easier for people. I have a number of years of experience. I've been doing this for 21 years now. So I'm excited to be able to kind of sit down and talk with you, even though I'm standing, but we'll disregard that. Talk to you just about what I've seen over those 20 years and the evolution of various patterns. And yeah, it'll be cool. I'm excited.
Yeah, and a lot of beginners watch my channel who are just getting started, and 20 years is a lot of time. I graduated last week, so I don't have that much experience. But they often ask this question like, tech keeps changing. How do we make sure that we're not gonna run out of jobs or whatever? I think Kubernetes just created more jobs, for example, but we'll talk more about that later. But this also buzz in student communities more like, is AI going to replace the jobs or on things like that? It's not, but that's what we're going to talk about. How the industry has progressed and what patterns David has seen. But before moving forward with that, can you tell us a little bit more about what is your understanding when we talk about the culture of around DevOps? So some people say that it's about the culture and whether it's about the procedures like the tools like CI, CD, or whatever. So what does it mean when someone says DevOps to you?
Well, I'll start by saying, it's all of the things that you've mentioned. And, we can get very opinionated in the tech space, and you'll hear comments like, DevOps isn't a job title. And I just want to throw all that away. Like, people have DevOps as a job title, and let's not just disregard that. The fact is that the DevOps movement and the culture has progressed to a point where companies have started hiring people to help build that culture, build that tooling, and implement some of these patterns. So if you have DevOps in your job title, go for it. Have lots of fun. But let's go back to I'll talk a bit about my history and how I got into DevOps for a start, right? So this is 2001. I was 18, 19 at the time. In fact, I've just aged myself. There we go. And I got my first programming job working for a small company in Scotland who built a ticketing system for horse race tracks, which meant that we wrote barcode scanners, we wrote EPOS tills, and we wrote back-end server software and CRMs to connect all of these things together. That's not very interesting, but what was the pain point of that job was our deployment looked like this. I would be working on the daemon server, written in C, compiling it for months, right? Literally testing it inside of our office on a Linux machine, and then we'd get to a point where we think, okay, we should probably start upgrading our customers. And an upgrade to our customer looked like me jumping into the back of a car with a server and driving to every horse racing track in the United Kingdom to go and deploy our new software. It was extremely, extremely painful. Now, there wasn't a lot of options back then besides, shipping a USB key or a CD-ROM and trying to talk someone over the phone of how to provision this stuff onto a Linux server using SSH or whatever. In fact, it might even have been Telnet. It might have been really, really bad at the time. And we were looking for ways to improve that. So I think it was around the mid-2000s, maybe 2006, where Puppet became a thing. I read about it on some website and went, this sounds amazing. We can automate our deployment of our software. The other tricky thing here, I should point out, is that you might be thinking, well, why can't I just SSH onto the server? These servers ran CRMs and finance information. We didn't typically make them publicly available because we weren't able to well, we were able to secure them, but we weren't able to continue to guarantee the security of that system, especially when we weren't on site. But Puppet brought a whole new level of automation where we could have something running on all the servers, and if anyone did modify anything, then hopefully Puppet would detect that and revert it. So we started rolling out Puppet really early, managing all of our clients' servers that way. And that was really cool. It meant that the only time I had to drive up and down the United Kingdom was when something really, really broke or network access was unavailable, etc. So there were still bad days, but things were getting better. And I think wasn't the start of DevOps. People were talking about DevOps back then, but there wasn't a lot of buzz. There wasn't a lot of understanding. I don't think the concepts themselves had really been cemented. So tools were starting to evolve and help nurture that whole culture and movement. Shortly after Puppet, we got Chef, we got Ansible, we got SaltStack. Like this whole automation and configuration management was just really, really taking off. And that was exciting because it was also at the same time more people were getting interested in DevOps because the idea was that we don't really want to go 6 months without deploying our software. We were starting to talk about continuous integration, and we were talking about continuous test and continuous deployment and continuous delivery and continuous all the things. And these are all just fancy words that are shifting left certain aspects of the development pipeline so that we do it more often and increase our velocity and we have a lot more confidence. I'm sure you've had people say this before, but going 6 months without doing a deploy means that you have 9 billion things that have changed since the last deploy. And that is a surface where things can go wrong. The quicker and the faster that we do that shipment of software, there are less change, less things to go wrong, and you build up this confidence. You get more sleep. That's the goal, right? We all want to sleep more. So DevOps started out of this automation phase, and then people realized that we need to increase our confidence. We need to get more sleep. We have to build a culture where we don't have silos within our development teams. That was another big part of DevOps. Again, developers don't write software, give it to the ops team deploy it, the ops team come back and say, hey, it doesn't work, you go fix it. Because this handoff process is also really bad for velocity because it slows things down. And then when you fix the bug on the dev side, you hand it back to the ops team. You've got to wait for them to have time to be able to deploy it again. And then if something else broke, you got to send it back. And it was just really, really painful. And at the time, our development servers back then, we didn't have fancy machines like we have today. It was actually probably kind of painful trying to run GCC or any other compiler on your personal laptop. Let me shut my phone up. We had development servers, shared development servers. And I think this is really funny because we're 20 years later, and we're now coming back to that shared development server. So it's like the old adage, what is old will be new again eventually. We're definitely getting there with shared Kubernetes clusters, but maybe we'll talk about that later. But yeah, shared development servers. And the challenge there was I ran all of our shared development servers. They were Debian boxes. They ran apt update and apt install regularly. When I'm working on Perl or C or anything else that has a shared library, I would install it on a dev server. And when it goes to prod, that thing isn't there anymore. There were just all these things. So I'm now just waffling at you. But DevOps was the golden answer, right? This is what people were saying was going to fix everything. We defined everything as configuration. We have reconcilers like Puppet, Chef, SaltStack, and Ansible that are continually running, making sure what we have on one server is the same on another server. We're looking for parity, we're increasing our velocity, and we're breaking down silos. To me, that's the important part of DevOps, is making sure that developers and operations and have shared responsibilities. We still have a huge need for operations people. Developers like to think with the cloud, we can just write our own Pulumi code and and that's it. I have my EC2 box. What do I need ops for? Yeah. There's so much more you need to do. Right? We've got to talk about security. We've got to talk about resiliency, redundancy, backup strategies, all this other stuff that developers probably haven't went down the beaten path before, and our operators have. So it's not about replacing ops with people in dev that know how to do that stuff. It's about shared responsibilities and building a better platform. And this is why, in my opinion, we're seeing such a rise in platform engineering today. Because we've had a good run of 10 years of DevOps. We've got developers thinking about infrastructure. We've got developers thinking about redundancy, resiliency, scale. But now we need to bring in all of those good procedures and patterns that we missed from our operational
Hmm.
side. So yeah, really cool time. But that's what DevOps means to me.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And it's like you mentioned, it's starts with automation, but it's much more than that. And it's not like a goal you need to achieve, but a never-ending process, um, if you will. But since you mentioned, like, I have a few questions before I forget. You mentioned like around 20 years ago. What was that? 2000s, early 2000s, right?
Yeah.
Um, Correct me if I'm wrong. There was this adoption of agile methodologies, right? And like you mentioned about ops teams, so that was not really helping the folks who managed and deployed software products. But my question to you is, what with agile, um, has like DevOps replaced it, or what's happening? Do they work with each other, or how's it working?
They go hand in hand, right? If we consider DevOps to be increasing velocity and confidence in our deployment strategies, Agile brings that to the management of the projects and the way that we work with issues, the way that we communicate and interact with other departments in our companies. Right? Your finance team or your marketing team may not really know or care about what your deployment pipeline looks like, but it doesn't mean that we can't apply those same principles of process and automation, shorter iterations, more communication to the project management side, which is what Agile was doing. I think these were two movements, two cultures that were just they both happened around the same time. They were both growing at the same time, but one was focused on the way that companies are structured, communicate, and process, and one was focused on deployment, automation, developer velocity, etc. Um, I don't think you can have one without the other. I think that would be really tricky. You can write all the infrastructure and configure management, infrastructure as code and config management that you want, but if your company still works in a very traditional waterfall style system, you're not really going to get the benefits of increased velocity. It's really hard to do agile on a small part of a team or a sub team or a company. Like you really need buy-in, you need culture, you need blameless everything, right? People have to be able to take risks, people have to be able to accept ownership and responsibilities, and you have to do that in an environment where you feel safe and comfortable to do so. So yeah, I don't think you can have agile without DevOps. I don't think you can have DevOps without agile. I think together
Hmm.
they're harmonious, and we can all, we should be in a position now in 2022 where companies
Yeah.
have acknowledged this, companies have accepted this, and they are making strides and improvements as much as possible.
Yeah. And since we're speaking of agile, like we learned about this in college, like in university, the Agile Manifesto, which has all the notes related to it. So there it mentions that when it comes to DevOps is not just supposed to be about tools, and it mentions about individuals and the interactions over the processes and tools. So what do you think about that?
Well, yeah, we're humans first, right? Like we have to be able to communicate and work together. We have to be happy and comfortable working with one another. Otherwise, everything else falls down. So, yeah, you have to build relationships that work across teams and departments, and also internally within teams as well. Again, the idea of being blameless teams, right? People are going to make mistakes, and
Hmm.
I can tell you, if having worked at dozens of companies in the last 20 years, that when people make a mistake, at least in the early 2000s, then they got called out on it, potential bullying, I guess. You're like, you're crap. You don't know what you're doing. Okay, you're never deploying to prod anymore. It was a horrible culture. And that affects your software. It doesn't matter how good your tools are, but that's going to leap through. It's going to seep through, and it's going to just not really work because people can bypass processes and tools if they don't feel comfortable sharing change with one another. Revision control wasn't even that popular in the early 2000s. Like, I remember I would SSH onto the dev server and you'd try and vim a file and it would say someone else has got it open. So you would copy it and add the extension .me or .david or .back, and then you would modify that one and then try and merge them back. Like, this was our development workflow. And the amount of times you would lose changes because two people were modifying a file at the same time and then overwrote one another's work. It was super painful and things got heated and things were not like when the culture is that bad, the software is never going to be shipping as well as it could. So yeah, but we're much better today, right? I hope so. I hope that people that are coming into our industry, particularly students that are graduating, etc., see a whole more welcoming, more inclusive, just better environment and culture that has we've learned from all these mistakes now. I really hope that no one else has to experience that.
And isn't that why we are talking about history? So we talk about history to make our future better.
Yeah, if we don't acknowledge our history, then we're doomed to repeat it. I can't remember who that is
No,
a quote from, right? And I'm sure I've
no,
paraphrased it rather than
somewhere.
directly quoted it. But yeah, by sharing these stories about how crap things were, that's how we improve. Otherwise, at some point, someone's going to go, oh, well, we could just do this. And it's like, oh, no, we did
No.
that before. It didn't work. So, yeah, the more you learn about our history, the better our future can be.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And just one more question I have about like when we talk about the early 2000s, can you maybe tell us a little bit more about some of the challenges that organizations face when they're planning to adopt the DevOps culture? Because it's not going to happen overnight. Maybe people, you know, um, their resistance to change or whatever, or something like moving your already the infrastructure that you have when we talk about DevOps, so moving the existing infra to, let's say, something like microservices or whatever. So according to you, all these years, what are some of the challenges that you have seen organizations face when it comes to that?
Yeah, really cool question. I mean, I'll tell you one thing, right? Every challenge that I've seen over the last 20 years is the same challenge repeated, 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 repeated. Whether it was adopting Agile, whether it was adopting DevOps, whether it was adopting cloud or adopting Kubernetes and containers, it's fear. Always, always fear. Because what you're doing when you try and embrace these better technologies for reason one, two, and three is that there's enough people that just don't like change. In fact, nobody likes change, right? Unless you're the one that's saying, here, let's change this because you understand the problem. The people that haven't acknowledged or seen that problem yet don't understand why the change is coming. And change is scary. So it's always the same. And the number one thing for developers to do is just to get really comfortable being uncomfortable. Like, you've got to trust the people around you. When people make suggestions, try to understand those suggestions. Try to understand the problem that it's solving. Give it some thought and see, is there another way to solve this problem? There's a really cool book called Holacracy. I believe the author is Brian Johnson, I'll say. Could be wrong. And the idea of that is to build autonomous sub teams, although they call them circles in the book, and giving those teams the ability to make whatever change they need in order to make their lives easier. And then the idea being that if we all continue to make change and we get comfortable with change, that the entire company can blossom together. Really cool book. It's worth a read. But yeah, fear is always the one that people don't like. Now, example, when we were adopting the cloud back in 2005, whatever it was, very early AWS days at least. Um, the idea that we would have instances that we destroyed whenever we wanted to make a change made a lot of people uncomfortable. Oh, my software's running on that, and you want to destroy it and spin up a new one every day? Yes. Why? Oh, because people make changes, and we want to be able to have confidence that these machines are what we say they're going to be, etc., etc., etc. And you've got to push people into that boundary where they really are uncomfortable and show them that it can work. And again, inspiring confidence in people through turbulent times. So it's always fear. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. Listen to your friends and your colleagues, and accept that change is inevitable. And rather than pushing back on that change and being, a voice of negativity, embrace it and learn from it as much as possible, especially when you have an environment where it is safe for things to go wrong. Failure is inevitable. You know why I am a really good engineer, Kunal? Because I have failed more times than everyone else that I work with. And it's through that failure that we learn and continue to grow.
At the point you mentioned about learning and about the people part as well, about collaboration. So especially with the DevOps teams, right, it's not about everyone is working on different with a different purpose. It's like you're working towards one common goal. And obviously the guidance part you mentioned, I think failure teaches one quite a lot. So yeah, thanks for sharing about that, Rocco. And just one question I have is like, we talk about 20 years, tools have evolved, and
Yeah.
even right now so many things keep coming, right? Even in the Kubernetes space in itself, so many tools and uh, you know there's so many services, so many startups. Just go to KubeCon, I saw like 10 startups on cost, managing your cost and APIs and securities and things like that. So it is good. But my question to you is, and others may have this as well, how do you keep up to date with all these things as an individual? And how do you decide how to be up to date with relevant stacks in your organization?
How do I keep up to date with technology? I mean, this is not good advice for anybody. I think I'm an outlier, and maybe people, in fact, you might be like me. I mean, I think there are people in technology that are just always curious. I call myself, or at least I used to in my bio when I go to conferences, a technology magpie. And what I meant by that is that whenever I see anything shiny, I have to go and play with it. I have this compulsion. I'm always curious. I see new software, and my first instinct is I don't need this. And my first instinct is not I don't need this. It's oh, what's that doing that this other software doesn't do? So whenever I see a new open source project on GitHub or on Twitter or Hacker News or Reddit or anything like that, then I set aside a bit of time and I go play with it. Now, it means that my knowledge. Are you familiar with the concept of like T-shaped developers?
Yeah, I keep preaching about it. Yeah,
Right.
know
Okay.
everything about something, something about everything. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. I mean, I am one of those. I like to learn about a little bit about everything because I feel that it gives me the enough context, it gives me enough knowledge to be able to make maybe not make decisions, but make judgments on whether I need to go down a certain path when I approach a problem. At the worst case scenario, I have enough knowledge to know what I need to go and learn next to make that decision. So I don't go super deep on a lot of things. I go really deep on cloud native. I go really deep on Kubernetes. I'm all in on that ecosystem. But when it comes to AI, ML ops, big data, data warehouses, data lakes, when it comes to even databases and computer game programming and game engines. Like I know a little bit about all of these little things because I experiment and I play. I've written Android apps, I've written iOS apps, I've written progressive web apps. I've worked with Redshift and BigQuery. Am I an expert in any of them? No, far from it. But I know just enough to hopefully make the right decisions and answer questions as I deal with other stuff that is slightly tangential. So I'm glad to hear that you're always preaching about T-shaped developers. I consider myself one. I encourage other people to follow a similar pattern, but it's definitely not for everybody. We definitely do need other types of developers, people that go really, really deep into kernels and eBPF and all these security things. Those people are invaluable. And if you work in open source, which I'm sure, in fact, you do encourage everyone to do, you get to learn from these people as well. So you can be curious, you can be the magpie, you can go and play and learn things and build up this vast amount of knowledge, and have friends that do the super deep stuff and consult as needed. So yeah, open source is fantastic for that.
Yeah. And speaking of learning from people, go check out Rawkode Academy. You have there's some great content literally over there, and David also does clustered, so you can get to see some live. I still have to be on clustered. I'm sure Oh, good. I'll
Soon,
join
soon,
definitely
Kunal.
soon. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
like
I'll leave
my
the links in the description. You can check it out if you want.
yeah, my YouTube channel and my shows are the most selfish thing I've ever done, and I say that tongue in cheek, of course. But I really like I get open source maintainers to come and sit with me for 2 hours and show me their project, and I get to learn about it and share it with other people. And with clustered, I get to fix. I encourage people to break Kubernetes clusters, and we fix them live on the stream. And again, it's just me continually learning from other people, but in a format that other people can learn too. So yeah, selfish, but super, super helpful, hopefully, for the broader community.
Yeah, definitely. You won't regret it. To go check it out, and I'll leave some links in the description below. Just one question I have, since we're talking about DevOps, and there was a little bit of a buzz about it at KubeCon as well, which is security, right? So when we talk about DevOps processes, where do you factor security in, or just like a broad question about anything you want to share about security awareness?
Yeah, we're going full circle now, right? So what happened in the 2000s? As we started adopting DevOps, we started moving the operate so as my story at the start kind of shared, You would develop for months and months and months and months and months and then ship, and then develop for months and months and months and months and ship. And DevOps brought this, oh, well, let's ship more and be comfortable with that. So we were building, shipping, building, shipping, building, shipping. What happened was we kind of disregarded all of our security practices that we had already built up at that point because it was not less important. That's a horrible way to list it. It became deprioritized because in order to increase the velocity of our deployment, we had to cut some things out. Like we couldn't have a security audit with every deploy because we deployed 20 times a day. We couldn't do SAS scanning with every deploy because the tooling didn't exist. We couldn't do proper secret management to a certain point. Again, well, tooling wasn't quite there yet, but also we were adopting containers and getting secrets into containers was difficult. Like, we were continually making trade-off after trade-off to keep that velocity up. I think now, especially because of the last 5 years, we have seen so many open source supply chain attacks that the entire concept of DevSecOps and supply chain security and improving the scanning side of what we're actually running in our clusters and attestation and all these other things is that we need to now, we shift lead left to the operations side, now we need to shift left to the security side. And all that means is, well, how do we start to worry about security sooner? Now, in the 2000s, we couldn't do auditing and security scanning on every deploy. But in 2022, we now have these tools. GitLab are great drivers here. They've got CI/CD things that happen inside of GitLab clusters that do SAS scanning, they do static analysis, they do all this other stuff. We're seeing that in GitHub Actions. We're seeing that with Circle CI. We're seeing companies like Aqua bring out Trivy, which is doing in-cluster scanning and image scanning in CI/CD. So we're in a really fortunate position where, as developers building software, we can kind of take advantage of these open source and tooling improvements from the security landscape and just get a nice little tick box on our pull request that says, hey, your static analysis scan was fine. Your test passed. There are no vulnerabilities or CVEs in this base container image, etc. We don't really need to do anything, which is great because now we have a lot more confidence that when we deploy something to our to our clusters, that we don't have to worry about certain security mitigations. Now, of course, that's all null and void if your Kubernetes version is 14 months out of date, which sadly is still very, very common. But we are seeing good improvements there, especially with managed services like AWS, GCP, Civo, etc. Like, getting a modern, up-to-date Kubernetes cluster has never been easier either. So we're just in a really great time where a lot of these things can shift left because the tooling is improving, and the cloud is really a good driver of that, and all these other companies and startups that are building tooling and keeping it open source, which makes it even better. So yeah, really, really cool.
Yeah, I saw the tweet by Anais. She made a picture of all the tools related to security. I'll try to find it and leave it in the description below as well for you to check it out. Cool. Just one last question now is about the trends. What are you excited about? Or maybe something like I've seen like a lot of startups come into picture working on Kubernetes like management, providing abstraction, making it easy for folks to onboard. If you talk about, let's say, 3-4 years down the line, what are you really looking forward to?
Man, that is a tough question. So interesting things to me. Well, micro VMs are really, really cool. They bring a whole new level of security and that we get kernel level isolation that containers don't bring. I'm really excited by things like Firecracker, especially if they can run in a Kubernetes context. We never really seen the promise of the micro kernel, but I do hope that comes back at some point, which is where you actually get an entire kernel for every request on an HTTP application, or at least potentially that was the use case. So micro VMs and micro kernels, would love to see something take off a bit more there. I really just think that developers being more security conscious is also something that we need to be aware of. Like if we look at ChainGuard as a really good example, they've got the SigStore project and they've got the GetSign project. They're bringing out these tools that be able to improve our confidence in what we deploy is what we think we deploy. We've got signature checks on OCI artifacts. In fact, even an OCI registry itself is something that is going to be much more important in our entire developer lifecycle, not just for container images going to Kubernetes, but for a whole bunch of other stuff in the next 5 years, which I think is really exciting as well. WebAssembly is massive. I think that's going to change the way that we work as well. Being able to use WebAssembly, which allows us to really write code in any language, compile it to a common bytecode, and then again, we can run that in a Kubernetes cluster. There's a really cool project out of Microsoft, formerly DS Labs, called Crustlet, which is essentially a kubelet-like program that pretends to be a Kubernetes node that runs WebAssembly workloads for you in a cluster. So I think that is really cool. There's a company called Thremon, Freymon, I think, who are really driving WebAssembly as a backend application pattern as well. So you can write your APIs and Go and compile them to WebAssembly and deploy them on their open source project called Spin. Really, really cool technology as well. Lastly, I've always been a huge advocate of event-driven systems, and we've never really seen mainstream adoption of event sourcing and event-driven systems using, Red Panda is a really cool project that's kind of hot in the tails of Kafka, but removes the JVM and Zookeeper and other stuff like that. So I think as it gets easier for developers to manage and orchestrate event-driven workloads through serverless and things like Red Panda, I think hopefully we'll do that more. I mean, we're seeing some really cool stuff from AWS in this regard with AWS step functions, where we can write a state machine and each state has its own function that runs against it. And it just gives it a really visual way to build software that's hopefully going to have less bugs and more compile time and runtime constraints to keep it safe. And I said lastly, but now I mean lastly. We're seeing really esoteric programming languages become much more mainstream now. So we've got so much choice. Like we don't really need to write Java anymore. Go is a good example of this in the cloud native ecosystem. But there are many other languages. Rust is phenomenal as a systems programming language. I think we'll see adoption of Rust come into more sections, compartments, like developers that aren't just doing systems programming will do it. Web developers, serverless developers, even front end is going to be a target with Rust because of WebAssembly. Zig is an amazing language as well, which is like it supports C, but then brings on a whole lot more. And then my favorite language that I always mention during bits like this, and nobody's ever heard of, so I won't be offended if you're like, what? Is a language called Pony, which comes back to my event-driven thing. Pony is an actor-based language, and the actor pattern is just one of those things that everybody should go read the book on. It is phenomenal. But the idea being that our applications are made of actors who receive messages and then send more messages as a result of that. So check out the actor pattern, check out Pony. Don't become a master, just learn enough that you know what it solves, and then that's pretty cool. So yeah, that's what keeps me excited. These things are cool.
Yeah. Ooh, definitely. Lots to think about. Lots to research for you all as well. And if you want to learn more, if you want to get more of Rawkode, you can join his channel and everything. But yeah, stay tuned for my tutorials on Pulumi as well. I'll upload those on my channel soon. But really excited, Rawkode to talk to you, and it was amazing. And we're going to be doing a Twitter space soon as well. So make sure you join, and all the links can be found in the description below. But really appreciate you giving the time, and yeah, thanks for joining. Have a good one, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Yeah, thank you very much.